Chapter 4, Planning Projects, Part 1. These are our learning objectives. Project planning should guide the project execution. That goes without saying. Planning is often the most difficult part for people to grasp. Most of the time, it's on an unappreciated part of the project itself. Now, theory and practice show that good planning is critical to good execution. In fact, the main purpose of the project planning is to smoothly guide the project execution. The more detailed and well done the plan is, the easier and smoother the project goes. Here's an example of the planning processes and their outputs. Project integration management planning tasks come first. Basically, it's coordinating all the project management knowledge and all the project management knowledge areas throughout the entire project lifespan. Sounds daunting. The main planning tasks include creating a team contract and developing the project management plan. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's take a look at that team contract. The team contract itself makes the team much more cohesive, brings them together under common understanding. Don't forget, one of the biggest problems you're going to have is communication. So as a consequence, you can use that contract and that time together to build your team with team icebreakers. You can do some team building exercises. Most of the time, the people in the team don't know each other, so it's going to be a very critical time to put things together. You're going to clarify team communications, when and how they'll be done, the code of conduct for the team so that everyone's on the same page. Participation may not be just they're actually relating to one another and what they're going to do, but when they're going to participate as well. Who's going to be involved in the process of problem solving? And the meeting guidelines so that there's an agenda and a predictable way of doing things. See the sample on page 115 of the book. Let's take a look at that project management plan. It's used to document planning assumptions and decisions, facilitate communication among stakeholders, and document approved scope, cost, and schedule baselines. Project management plans are a document used to coordinate all project planning documents. They guide a project's execution and control. Remember, control is phase 4 that happens during the execution. Project management plans usually facilitate communication among stakeholders and provide a baseline for process management and project control. There's that phase 4 again. We're going to talk a little bit about baselines. A baseline is a starting point. Right now, that's all you need to understand. We'll cover it more a little bit later. So what are some of the attributes of the project management plan? Well, they should be dynamic, flexible, and receptive to change. We don't like to see change. That kind of upsets most project managers, but it's a fact of life that once you start a project, change will happen. Just as projects are unique, so project plans are unique. A small project would have very few things. A large project would be much more expansive. Remember, it's important to tailor all planning documents to fit the needs of the specific project. You don't want to create a monster. Here are some common elements in project management plans. First of all, there's usually an overview of the project. Then there's the project organization, the management and technical processes you're going to include, the work to be performed, the schedule information, budget information, references to other planning documents, and basically a detailed schematic of what's going to happen. And this is what your project looks like. Go ahead and see the handout. Let's take a look at the scope management. Now I love this little cartoon. This is how the customer explained they wanted the swing built. A little expansive. They wanted more than they thought they needed, but They described it to the project manager that way. So this is the evolution and the view of each individual involved. This is how the project leader understood it. This is how the analyst designed it. This is how the programmer wrote the program. This is how the business consultant described it. This is how the project was documented. What operations actually did during the execution phase. This is how the customer was actually billed for it. This is how it was supported. I love that one. But in actuality, what the customer really needed was this. So let's take a look at scope management. Scope management is basically planning the scope. It's collecting all the requirements, which is a very difficult thing to do. It's defining the scope. Remember, the scope is how much we're going to do. And then you create what is called a work breakdown structure, or a WBS. So how do we define the scope? Well, it's not only what is in there, but what's not included in the project. For example, some of your stakeholders may have assumptions that you're going to do things that you need to specifically state, we ain't going to do that. So at that point, you need to say, we will provide the product, we will not provide the training, for example. Goals of the project and the time, cost, resource estimates. We are going to include a baseline. We're going to get to what that is in a minute. And then our performance measures. Don't forget, people do not do what you don't inspect. Don't expect what you don't inspect. So how do we go about defining this scope? Well, normally it's going to take some experts, people who have done this type of thing before, people who are in the company and have had some experience with either the process, the people, or the product itself. You might have a product analysis done by a specialist, and you might hold some workshops that can give you insight into what to expect and how the scope can be defined. Collecting requirements is a big deal. So basically, a requirements management plan, which describes how the planned requirements will be analyzed, documented, and managed, is one of those things that you're going to need. The second one is called a requirements traceability matrix, an RTM, which is a table that lists all the requirements and the various attributes of each requirement and the status, so that you can make sure that you get them all done. This is what one might look like. We've mentioned baseline in the past. Let's just take a look at what a baseline is. Let's define one. So a baseline is a starting point. Now, we all recognize this starting point. So it's a starting point. It's someplace that we begin our measurement. It's an observation that is documented so it can be used for future comparison. It's very important. Without that, we don't know where you are and where to go. So let's talk about how that's used in a work breakdown structure. By the way, this is an example of a work breakdown structure. It's a deliverable-oriented decomposition of a project into smaller components. And you can see how that is actually done here. So we've got the initiation phase on the far left. And you'll notice it's got assign key personnel, prepare project plan, review project plan by team, prepare CM plan, prepare QA plan. So those are all breakdowns of the initiation process, and they're numbered in a special way, in a way that would facilitate us keeping track of every single process there. How do you create one? It's not difficult. A work breakdown structure is a deliverable-oriented grouping of work. We've already said that. It defines the total scope of the project. If it's not in the WBS, it's not going to get done. So the WBS is actually a discrete set of tasks that are grouped together in a logical hierarchy. And there's our example again. It can be shown in two different forms. The form on the right is called a chart form. And then you can also be shown in a tabular form, and this would be a tabular form. It's basically an outline. And notice that this example has 6 different categories at level 2. So foundations, external construction, internal construction, roof, services, yard, and access are all on level 2.